At the end of my studies, I had to write a thesis, and I wrote it on the negotiation process that led to the Cotonou Agreement as an example for negotiating in European development policy. And yeah, I'm also curious to know how we are going to launch this process compared to the one that was launched in '69, I guess. And yeah, hope that we can also learn from those times and make things even better.
I'm working, as I said earlier, with the Africa Group of Negotiators, and I'm using this as an example because there it's a partnership between 54 countries, a marriage between 54 countries that have a range of interests. So this is the differentiated interests and objectives in that story of differentiated equality that range from real need to alleviate poverty, because many of these countries are least developed countries, to ranging right up to a need to have a license to continue to emit emissions into a global economy that's trying to reduce emissions. So you've got, completely disjointed needs and objectives there, but at the same time there's an ability in the group to come together around a common interest. And the common interest, incidentally, or maybe not so incidentally, is the means of implementation. That is what holds the group together, is to find a common agreement in the global negotiations around a means of implementation.
If we go back to the marriage metaphor again, I'm an unmarried person, but I'm in a relationship and I've got 2 kids. So I think we do not need a contractual agreement to get our partnership going, but all the deeds and everything we are doing is kind of showing us that we're in a good partnership. And what seems to be the problem sometimes with Cotonou is that on paper it looks like a perfect marriage, but somehow that doesn't seem to provide for it.
We had a disbursement process that every quarter or every other quarter we'd make disbursements based on certain targets. Once a country had 2 or 3 disbursements in a row, there was a lot of motivation to keep going. And there was really a big success, building on success and success breeding more success, it creates some momentum. And we all know that no country performs well in all aspects. So there's a little bit of art in sort of the donor molding the program to facilitate or to help that success be achieved.
Is there a problem with the agreement, or is there a question in here in the way we implement that agreement? For instance, is there enough capacity in EU delegations to engage in political dialogue right now? Does funding need to be reconfigured away from needs-based poverty alleviation and towards catalytic investment opportunities, a new way of looking at it maybe? Some of the issues that came up is the way that the Cotonou Agreement has been implemented, namely poverty alleviation through governments. Governments who are often regarded not as very good political leaders nor as fantastic economic managers. Is that the way to do it in the future? Is that the way to go? Want to think here if a very strong focus on poverty alleviation will remain in the future. Is there better ways of doing it? Are there examples of other partners or other relationship even of the EU with other groups of countries that could shed a bit of light on that? And then do we understand what our shared priorities are?
Something is turning the issue of poverty alleviation around, because obviously that's the end objective. But do we always have to say it that way? Firstly, and secondly, it's negative. And thirdly, it's not all-encompassing. And there are a variety of shocks that these ACP countries face. One of them is poverty, which is a very long-lasting and sustainable shock, which comes and goes in waves and gets hit by things like food price crises. So you've got that kind of issue around resilience against food price issues. You've got resilience against this oil issue. You've got resilience against climate change. So our proposition is to move away from poverty alleviation to building resilience as a much more encompassing.
How to combine the means with the policy dialogue. How to follow money in order to be sure that it's not only, as it is now, money being distributed, but you have the other side really discussing it and having the ownership of the process.
And basically we started wondering during our discussion, and it came down to the basic question, are we actually seeing the three pillars of Cotonou supporting one roof, which are the objectives that the means of implementation, trade, development and political dialogue is supposed to bring further? Or have we actually neglected the roof and have we been concentrating on individually improving three very good silos, and that the means of implementation have kind of developed a life of their own? Europe's hands are somewhat tied as we enter this process because of the particular means of implementation that we've been using. So part of the discussion today could be to better connect the why to the how. So we should discuss means of implementation, but as Alex has rightly proposed in the program, we should really connect it to the kind of partnership we would like to have.
So how to ensure that they are the two partners are on an equal position? And first of all, of course, each of the two has its own accountability. You know, the perception is that today we don't have these two systems which are working effectively to ensure accountability on both sides. So what happens is that, you know, given that there's no accountability on the other side, the donors tend to say what to do and so on. So there's it's one direction. Because
the system developed into a rather complex one, it also became relatively dependent on external expertise, whether locally from the government or from the country, or internationally through technical assistance. So that also meant that it became more difficult to integrate that in the kind of mainstream processes of government, of setting priorities, formulating poverty reduction strategies, and has then developed into what we would, under the Paris Declaration context, refer to as project management units and things that are kind of parallel to government as opposed to an integral part of it.
I think that the fact that we are moving into a new completely new sphere of priorities with the Sustainable Development Goals may be an opportunity to rethink about how we are going to structure this policy dialogue.
There are things like climate change, sustainable consumption, peace and security, recognizing that there's a definition that applies to the EDF within peace and security, so not everything applies. Water, food security, health, green economy, etc. So those are some of the global challenge issues. So the approach and model that was debated and suggested is to have an allocation within the EDF for these global challenges. I'm going to call them that from here on onwards. That then goes to the region, so Southern Africa or East Africa or whatever the sub-region is, and that countries within that region bid for some of that allocation based on projects that they've developed or emergency.
Did you already thought about the scenario of only budgetizing parts of the EDF, the part that is for national allocations, and keep perhaps the intra-ACP envelope as the financial instrument for the partnership, where where both sides decide together in their common institutions on how to spend the money over the different countries, cross-national allocations, decide on thematic lines.
From my experience of working in the multilateral negotiations around climate change, it's a very hard thing to get to a multilateral agreement. I mean, you could start this whole process again and never get there, and never get that kind of agreement, and you'd be throwing away something that's really good. So I want to echo Peter's sentiments around it's just an issue of not going the business as usual approach. An enormous amount has changed between 1969 and now. So you've got an instrument that's probably more good than bad, that's got some really good structure and accountability, etc. to it. And I think there's a big motivation for making that stronger, and that there's been a lot that's come out of this room today to point in the direction of doing that.
The long run may see the end of this EDF, which is sort of a peculiar animal. Certainly in the meantime, more thought has to be given towards how to use it to a more optimal advantage.